Hello, my AP US history friends. Hope everybody is doing well. Just wanted to hit you with another recap video through Unit 4 so far, and also hit on those terms that are going to be on your quiz for Friday. So, where we last left off is really the America system and the market revolution. We see this come about because of the War of 1812. We see that America needs internal improvements. So we do start connecting the country together through things like the Erie Canal, through railroads, through roads, through the telegraph, things of this nature. Politically, though, in this time period, we're looking at something called the Era of Good Feelings. Now, this is really the kickoff of the next little section of Unit 4 here. So the Era of Good Feelings, we only have one political party because of the death of the Federalists. After the War of 1812, their opposition to the war with England, we see that the Federalist Party is no longer going to be popular and they fade out, leaving just one political party, the Democratic Republicans. Now, this is the way it's going to be all the way through the presidency of John Quincy Adams. JQA, doesn't do too much as president of the United States, just the classic tariff thing that we look at that creates more sectional tension between the North and the South. John Quincy Adams, as seen as an elitist, he hires elitist, nose up in the air, not the common man sort of people to run his presidency and in his White House. And it's seen that his tariff bill is more positive for New England than it is for the South. This then, leads to, again, sectional divide between the North, who is going to vote mostly for John Quincy Adams, and the South, who is going to vote 100% for Andrew Jackson in the election of 1828. We find the formation of the Democratic Party with Andrew Jackson after the election of 1824, in which Jackson loses. Remember, he gets more electoral college votes and more popular votes, but the House of Representatives decides to go with John Quincy Adams instead of Andrew Jackson. Jackson is our first president who is elected under universal white male suffrage. There's no longer a property requirement for you to be able to vote, so your middle class and poor white males are now able to vote, leading to Jackson winning overwhelmingly. This would be the first piece of evidence for the age of Jackson being the era of the common man, is this universal white male suffrage that we see under the formation of the Democratic Party. So Jackson takes over as president. And another political party sort of immediately rises up to challenge Jackson's policies. Remember, Jackson is quite a prideful man. As much as he believes that the U.S. federal government should stay small and a lot of power should remain with the states and the people, he does use the executive power quite often to get done what he feels is necessary to benefit the common man. Now, this political party is called the Whig Party. They uprise to, go against Jackson. They're pretty unsuccessful at first, but do eventually end up getting some presidents later on and having some sort of political power until they collapse too eventually and become the Republicans. But just for your quiz, it is the Whig Party, right? So Jackson is also seen as the common man, not only because, universal white male suffrage leads to his victory, but also due to his King Mob inauguration, in which, the people really show up in droves to celebrate the president winning, President Jackson winning, so much so that he has to jump out of the back of the White House to avoid all of the crowds and the massive party and celebration, of his presidency as a whole. Right. Big things that happen under Andrew Jackson. First and foremost is the battle with the Bank of the United States. The Bank of the United States is seen, again, as like an elitist sort of organization that only supports the wealthy, having one centralized bank. Jackson very much hates this idea that this bank supports just your wealthy upper class. Again, they're giving out loans to congressmen for free, which he saw as, a horrible thing, even though, Jackson himself in the spoils system hires his own buddies and his own cronies that are like loyal to him. Still, it's not for Jackson. So he does go and attack the Bank of the United States. He vetoes their charter to renew the Bank of the United States. It does eventually collapse by taking the money out of the banks itself. This in the short term leads to an economic panic in the late 1830s, early 1840s. But in the long term, sets up privatized banking, which is important for people getting personal loans, the generation of small business. The reason why small banks or even large corporate banks exist today is because of Jackson's attack on the Bank of the United States. The other massive thing that occurs under Jackson is the nullification crisis. Essentially, South Carolina and other southern states are upset with what they call the Tariff of Abominations that Jackson passes. So they decide that they think they can nullify state laws, and they refuse to follow this, or federal laws. They refuse to follow this tariff. Because of this, Jackson passes the Force Bill, which allows him to use federal force, the Army, to enforce federal law, and forces the states, specifically South Carolina, to actually follow federal law. So that's a whole states versus federal power thing, but also shows the expansion of power of the president, as a whole, right? The last thing that's really important with Jackson specifically is the Trail of Tears. Now, Andrew Jackson, again, expands the power of the federal government, of the president, because they are the enforcer of the law. So even though the Supreme Court tells him that he is not able to move natives from the 5 civilized tribes in the southeastern part of the United States to Oklahoma, they say he can't do it. In the court case Worcester versus Georgia, Jackson does this anyway and says, hey, John Marshall has made his law, now let him enforce it. It's actually done under the next president after Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, but the sentiments of Jackson are still continuing. It is the age of Andrew Jackson, right? Along with all this massive change that we see in things like the market revolution, things that do occur in the country have social, political, technological, and economic changes, right? We've already talked about the economic and tech ones in the market revolution. There's a middle class now. You have a bigger divide between the wealthy and the poor classes. We also see, technology changes, which we talked about earlier in the video of the market revolution. This, again, leads to a divide where the North is going to be much wealthier than the South, and the South is completely dependent on cotton, king cotton, for their economic production, specifically because of Eli Whitney's cotton gin. We do, however, have a lot of social changes that do occur during this time period as well as a response to the market revolution. You have things like the temperance movement, where women are going to band together to try to ban alcohol. They do eventually do this much later on in U.S. history, but they are sort of coming together because of the changes. Husbands going to factories and actually having disposable income, which they then spend on alcohol, right? And they wish to ban this. We also have things like the abolitionist movement occurring. The people that want to ban slavery, not necessarily give equality to white and black America at this time, but definitely ban slavery for the abomination that it actually is. They sort of go together, the women and the abolitionists. In fact, at Seneca Falls, where we have the Declaration of Sentiments, which is basically women rewriting the Declaration of Independence, to say he meaning the patriarchy, not he meaning King George III. You do have a mix of not only, women's temperance movements, individuals, but also people of the abolitionists. We also have lastly, big thing here is the Second Great Awakening, right? The Second Great Awakening, is caused by these societal changes that are occurring because of the market revolution. People do turn back to God when things are much different in their society and their lives. A lot more individual freedom in capitalism, individual freedom in the market economy, so then a lot more individual freedom in religion, sparking, different groups, such as utopian societies like the Shakers, or different religious groups like the Mormons or the Baptists, which are much more emotional based. This is really the big difference between the First Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening is much more romantic, whereas the First Great Awakening is much more, sort of fire and brimstone, stick to scripture, right? So the Second Great Awakening overall is caused by these changes of the market revolution, but also this shift to romanticism ideas, and this idea of, being more involved in decision making, politically and economically for sure, but also socially with religious groups. So I do think that's all the terms that we had to hit for your quiz. Again, the SAQ is going to be on to what extent is the age of Andrew Jackson the age of the common man. We listed out those different things. You can also email me if you need help. And I will also say there is going to be a list question in which you need to list how President Jackson expanded the presidency of the United States. Let me know if anybody needs anything. Hope you have a wonderful day. See you on Friday for your quiz.